HumanX Ventures presents Inside the Coaching Mind. Terry Pettit coached the University of Nebraska's first national championship team in 1995 and put the state of Nebraska on a path to volleyball greatness. Now, Terry mentors coaches, writes books, and gives talks about leadership and team building to corporate and business audiences. Here's Coach Pettit to take us inside the coaching mind.
Thank you, David Young, and thank you, Brad Black and HumanX Ventures, an organization that recruits, develops, and mentors coaches and leaders. And we have three coaches and parents of wonderful players with us on today's broadcast to talk about the NCAA tournament. We've got Novak-Warrior, who was a two-time All-American setter at Nebraska, Kirsten Bernthal-Booth, who developed the Creighton program and handpicked her predecessor, and they had a wonderful season. And Kirsten has a couple daughters that play, and Don Shaw, who has had two kids that were wonderful players, and one of them, James, and his wife Molly are playing on the Pro Beach circuit, and they're avid volleyball watchers, and I'm really pleased to have us join us today. And it's been an interesting tournament. But before we get to that, Kirsten, this was your first year not being the Creighton women's volleyball coach. What was it like watching them? Of course, you were also watching your own daughter Reese, who's a setter for Northern Iowa. And what were the odds that Northern Iowa comes into the bracket, plays at Creighton? And what was that like, sitting there in the stands with the team that you have brought to such fruition, and then watching your daughter play for Northern Iowa?
Yeah, obviously a lot of mixed emotions, but mostly just a lot of gratitude. I loved all the women on that Creighton team, and I loved all the women on the Northern Iowa team as I've gotten to know them. So, Northern Iowa, I thought was going to lose the night before against Utah. They were dead in the water. And so I felt like Northern Iowa was playing on house money to have the opportunity. We thought there was a pretty good shot Northern Iowa would be sent to Creighton, knowing where they probably would land numbers wise. It was either Wisconsin or Creighton. And I kind of wanted them to be sent to Creighton, maybe my own selfishness to be able to watch all the teams. So it was really wonderful. They'd played Creighton earlier this year and just gotten smacked. So I really was hoping that didn't happen again. I'd gone neutral in clothing for that game, and my daughter was very clear that I would be out of the family if I was not in UNI gear for that second round matchup. So I was in my Creighton gear this past weekend, but for that match, I was in UNI stuff.
Yeah. Did you and Reese ever consider Reese coming to Creighton?
Not really. It really wasn't on the table. As you're well aware, all of my 22 years at Creighton, we ran a 5-1 every year. And I was always attracted to tall 5-1 setters. It was just what I generally recruited. And she at 5'8", that didn't hit. So, we did have discussions of, hey, you could go play for a top 10 program. But the likelihood is you'll be on the bench. And she was pretty clear she wanted an opportunity to play. So that's where we focused the efforts. And she sure has landed at a great program. She is absolutely loving it at Northern Iowa.
Well, Don, I know that had you been the Stanford men's coach when James came along, you'd have had no problem coaching James. But
not at all.
If you'd been the women's coach, could you have had Jordan on the Stanford team? Would you been comfortable with that?
Well, I would have been. I don't know if Jordan would have been, but I think that's the issue is how do you because when I left Stanford and I helped start up Mountain View Volleyball Club and I was the coach mentor for a few years, and then James came along, and the team that they put together when he was in the 17s was so strong that the guys who ran the club, they came to me and said, the only coach we have that's capable of coaching this team is you. So how do you feel? And I said, well, I'd love to do it, but I better check with James, see how he feels about it. So that's what I did. And he said, yeah, I'd love it. And so I coached him in 17s and 18s and had a blast. But, it's one thing when you've got the kid who's the best kid on the team. It just happens to be your kid, so, and I coach him like I would anybody else, but I'm sure, some parent along the way, of one of the kids who didn't play much was probably concerned that I was showing favoritism. But when the guy's the best guy by far, I don't think that's much of an issue.
Val, did you ever coach Akia?
I kind of coached her, but when it came down to it, I said, if you're not going to do lessons with me, you're going to go to Ping, the late great Ping. And that's what she did. I would just write a check and send her, and she absolutely adored Ping. And she coaches at Skyline Volleyball Club right now, and Ping was there, and she was like, Mom, the conversations with Ping were great, and he adored her just as much. And when he passed, a month or so ago, it was really hard on her. But yeah, I made a vow not to coach my daughter. I coached her, I think, maybe when she was in 13s, 14s, maybe, but that was it. That was done. But that was with Michael DiNardo. Me and Michael DiNardo coached them.
Well,
Preston, I always call him Preston DiNardo.
I think I know all of you well enough to know the answer to this question. I mean, you all love coaching, but would any of you return to college coaching right now? Coach Shaw?
No way. No way.
It would be so hard. It would be. You're not a college coach. You're a professional coach. So that's the hard part.
Well, it's not even. I mean, you're trying to recruit your own kids every year, along with the ones that you're looking to bring to the program. And to me, it's like, what the heck? I mean, if there's no loyalty involved anymore, I'd have a hard time with that, because I'm a big guy. I'm a big fan of commitment.
Me too.
Kirsten, everybody's wondering about you.
I would. I think you guys are talking about being at a top 10 program. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I have to be at that level. I think I still love to coach. At some point, I probably will coach again, even if it's like high school or club. But I'm not scared of the college game. But there are a lot of flaws right now. I think over the next 5 years, there's just going to have to be some cleanup. This is, I guess we've said this for a while. It's not sustainable, but I think we'll see some federal legislation, or someone's going to jump in. I hope that it'll get a little bit cleaner.
Something that I don't have a great perspective on, but my feeling is, in talking with people before we got to this last weekend, that talent had filtered down to the top 6 or 8 teams. And that, going into the tournament, there was kind of the feeling that maybe there was a gap between Nebraska and Kentucky. And then there was a gap between Kentucky and other teams. And then there were 6 or 8 teams that were ranked in the top 10. But do you think overall college volleyball was more competitive this year, was better this year, or are we seeing a diminution of talent if you're not one of those top 10, 15 programs?
Well, my first thought about that is, when you say maybe Nebraska was better than everybody else, Terry, I think that was kind of if you'd have taken a poll of Nebraska or the field amongst all the coaches, you'd probably have a huge percentage saying, I'll take Nebraska. I mean, like 95% almost. I mean, it's like, this is ridiculous. Why are we even playing this? Which is, why we always say that, again, that's why they play the games. But, there's that drop off. And then there's the handful of teams, maybe 5 that really have a legitimate chance to win. And I think, fortunately, we got those 4 teams now. It's a wide open ball game now with Nebraska out of the picture. So it's going to be very interesting. But I think you saw in the tournament, you've seen the drop off kind of occurred round by round. Because when it got to the round of 16, you only really had one team, Cal Poly, who had pulled off an upset, but you could see the difference in the teams, and I think you mentioned somewhere, online, Terry, on your page about somebody making good teams, look bad, and that's what happened. You saw that when you got to the round of 16, those first games, there were a couple of competitive, close scores, but you also saw this team. You can see this team is superior to that team, and then it's just a matter of them executing. And then you get to the next round, the round of 8, and there's these regional finals, and you got, that we had 2 darn competitive matches yesterday for sure. But you see there's this talent disparity, and Creighton has a great year, but boy, they didn't look good in their last match. And then same thing, Stanford. They got to their point where with Wisconsin, where they just weren't quite good, strong enough. But you could see the drop off as you went through the rounds. We have a handful of teams now with Nebraska along with these other teams, Texas included. That's where the drop off comes. And so we've worked our way through a tournament where there were a lot of thanks for coming, first round teams, and that they're happy to be there. But then you just keep they keep weeding themselves out.
Val, did you see Texas A&M? I'm not talking about upsetting Nebraska, but did you see them playing as well as they did yesterday? Yeah, you watch.
Yes, they I think I watched a match with them in Texas. I've watched one or two of their matches, and they just run such a fast offense, and it's just that setter delivers that ball so quickly to Ladicki and their outsides that it's just incredible. And then once in a while she'll throw to the middle they're showing, and I mean they've been solid pretty much all year. They've looked really good.
Yeah, Don, you made an observation about their setter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go. What was that?
Well, I mentioned it to you, and Val, Kirsten, you guys can you can chime in on this, how you feel about this. But I thought at the Louisville A&M match, the setting was really shoddy. I mean, it was like the sets were all over the place. So I kept looking at sets going up there and thinking, oh, that's a bad set, and I did that over and over and over again. So I thought that the A&M setter didn't have a great match, but boy, she sure had a great match last night. I mean, it was unbelievable. She was outstanding, and you're right. The way she was flipping it out there was just making it miserable for the middles of Nebraska. They were just not getting there. But I didn't think she had a great match. They just managed to survive that Louisville match, but partly because I thought the Louisville setter struggled as well. So maybe my observation was all wrong, but you can let me know how you felt about that if you have that observation.
Well, wait, Brooke Mosher for Pitt, Charlie Fearbringer for Wisconsin, Maddie Walk for A&M, Cassie O'Brien. Is there one of these that is clearly better than the others, or are they all just great fits for the team that they're on? What do you think?
Well, I think
Val?
I really think they all kind of, of course they're going to blend well with their team and who they are. Furbringer shows her hands so early and she's so balanced all the time that nobody knows where the ball's going. Like she fakes out everybody, and I think that she's so solid with that. The other three are just, they can put the ball where it's supposed to be, and their hitters, if it's a little bit off, their hitters are so good that they'll just adjust to that.
Well, nobody knows where the ball's going except we know where it's going on Wisconsin. I mean,
I think Pitt more than Wisconsin.
Yeah.
well,
Right. That's true. That Pitt more than Wisconsin for sure.
have we ever had this many extraordinary pin hitters in college volleyball? I'm just you all of these teams have great pin hitters, not just good pin hitters, and Kentucky has two of them.
A&M
Ron, what
does
do
too, in my opinion.
Hmm. Oh
you,
yeah.
yes, I wasn't aware of the one until yesterday because I haven't
Man,
followed A&M.
Cannon.
But the left side player had a
Stores.
great, yeah, Stores.
Hitting percentage wise, she didn't have a much better match than she had the previous match against Louisville, but um, her blocking was outstanding in the Nebraska match, and she made some plays like that you don't notice. You're always thinking about pin hitters, you're thinking about kills and hitting percentages, but she made a lot of nice plays and I thought played a much better game, better match against Nebraska than she had the night before.
And
I
I
always
think
love to
too. Oh, go ahead,
Mel.
Kirsten.
All I was going to say is I love watching great players at endgame and see what type of swings they are taking. And I think the A&M stars in those big moments took big rips. And I'm not going to call players out, but I thought some other teams that maybe struggled in big moments, maybe even their numbers were decent for the match, but I didn't think in the big moment they were making the play. Maybe they got a kill on a lucky tip or something along those lines. But I love to see what a player, how they're swinging, even if they make an error, but how are they swinging, And I thought you could see, I thought A&M's players stepped up in those moments with some big time swings.
Kirsten, I would add two things to that. One, I did not see that I can recall a bad decision by a Texas A&M player during the match. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they scored a lot of points hitting into the block, hitting into the seam of the block, and an ill-formed block creates more kills than no block. And my feeling is that in the Nebraska Texas A&M block, for much of the match, the pin blockers and the middle blockers were not sealing low. They were late because of the tempo, and they weren't sealing low. And I saw it on the right side with Virginia's block was high, and she was kind of late with her arms, and I saw it with Landfair on the left side.
And there was one block that Murray made, and she blocked the ball, but she was reaching out so far. I mean, she was late and she was reaching way out and let Nikki try to take it down the line. And but they showed the replay, and I just thought, oh my Lord, if that's the blind squirrel theory of blocking right there,
Yeah.
Well, when she blocked that ball.
Yeah.
I remember they showed the replay of that, Don. Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys. Did you guys ever train when we would run into situations, fast tempo or smaller players? And I had if I had a oversized kid, a 6'4" or something, we would almost half jump on those so that they could just be low and over, as compared to, going all, max jumping gives them arms rather than hands, right? And you want the ball to be hitting your hands.
Well, you're
I
talking
was going to comment on that.
Yeah, you're talking to one of the. Go ahead, Val. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to comment on that. When you have a small, because Stowers is 5'11", and when you have a smaller hitter like that, I mean, I teach my kids that you wait till they jump and then you jump, because if you're jumping at the same time as that kid, then you're actually on your way down while they're hitting, while they meet the peak of their jump for a smaller kid. So being a 6'3" blocker, 6'5" blocker, it's really hard to block a smaller outside hitter. It's easier to block the taller outside hitters.
I watch Northern Colorado a lot, because they're in Greeley, and it's I've worked with their team for years, and their players are around 5'11", 6 foot. They will consistently score better attack wise when they play Washington or Big Ten teams than they do when they play teams in their own conference. And it's the same thing. They beat Washington this year. They went 5 with BYU, and they're doing it because the block is bigger and not ceiling low. And that's what I thought was happening yesterday with A&M and Nebraska. That it was a technical issue. I know some of these coaches pretty well. Know Coach Skinner well. Do you think that they have a brand? Kentucky's won the SEC conference 9 years in a row. That's impressive. When you consider Texas has been in that conference for the last 2 years, Florida was there during that entire time. What are Craig's strengths as a coach? Kirsten?
I'm trying to think. We played Kentucky 8 years in a row. They always have good setters. The other thing, I was trying to think, the last 3 setters back to the Kansas City kid when they won the national championship, and I'm going blank on her name, but the last 3 setters all started as they've all started as freshmen. Madison Lilley, thank you. They've all started as freshmen, so I think that's a unique thing that they've done. Usually, a kid, and I know this freshman didn't start at the very beginning of the year, but obviously pretty early on they pivoted to her to take the reins. Same with the setter prior, and then Lilley prior to that. They've always had really good outsides, just fundamentally strong. I mean, I just think Skinner's the type that can kind of adjust to his team pretty consistently in 5'1s, if I remember, even with smaller kids. I think he wants really athletic, fast. I mean, if you look at his setters, they have good feet, good hands, and he's not as consumed, I don't think, with size as like I was from a setter perspective. But Skinner's one of the best in the business for sure.
Yeah. Jamie Morrison, I'm somewhat familiar with because he's somebody that I've talked with when he was a professional coach about coming into the college coaching ranks. So it didn't surprise me that he would be not overwhelmed by Nebraska's talent or by the speed that, Andy Jackson ran the slide. He's very technical. But I also think that you have a tendency to run a really fast offense, maybe when you don't have the size that other teams have. But I don't know. I didn't see those matches with Texas. They played Texas twice. They won once. Val, what do you think that Jamie does really well?
Well, I've heard Jamie speak to his players, and I think that he is very open and honest with them. Number one, and he wants to build a Nebraska type program, and I don't he wants to build a Nebraska type program in A&M, which he can because their crowd is just nuts. I mean, it's right on top of you. It's kind of a hostile environment to play in. And, it's really hard to go in, especially as a Texas team, as Texas, and go in and try and win in that gym because it's just, they're right on top of you and it's super loud. And, he's doing a great job there. And, he has a game plan and he's very, technical with where the ball should be and how fast it should be and where you are on defense, and they're just all in the right spot and know exactly what to do, and that's just comes from the coaching of him and what his values are and what he teaches.
Don, you mentioned earlier that you were coaching men when Dan Fisher was a player at Pacific. He grew up in Santa Barbara. What's your observations about Coach Fisher?
Well, he he is probably more than a lot of those other coaches. Kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve a little bit. You can see when he's frustrated, and you can see when he's ticked off. But um, I think he's put together a great program there, and the players play hard for him, and he's and he's got a talented player like Babcock who I mean, that's you got that aircraft carrier, in the words of the late Coach McGuire, that you can build around. But they've got I haven't really seen anything that I don't like about what that team does. They're a good solid program.
Yeah, I think with Nebraska out of the tournament, and I guess you could say this about all of them, but I really think it may favor Pitt more than anybody else because they figured to maybe meet in the semifinals, and of all the teams that are there now, I tend to think that they've got a good shot at being in that final match. Kelly Sheffield.
I sent Fish a little note a while back, just reminding him if you've been in all these Final Fours but haven't made it, haven't broken through yet. I just reminded him that at Stanford in the 80s, we were in 5 Final Fours without winning, and so I know how he feels. But you just keep banging on the door, and sooner or later, you make a hole or it opens, and so I know how that is. You just got to keep banging.
Yeah, Kirsten, you have to have played Wisconsin a couple times through the years?
I never played it against Sheffield. We played against Pete Waite.
Okay.
But no, I've not. But I think I loved watching Carter Booth last night. I mean, she's been a stud, but she was, I think, even more ferocious as she went going. Kelly has done a phenomenal job. I think he, does a great job. His players have bought into what he's doing. I'm trying to think, they always have a stud outside and then can kind of reload. I just think, he knows the type of pieces to fill in. He'll get these rogue, really tall players and pluck them in, usually on the right side. But I mean, the past few years, he's had a 6+ type of kid for the last 8 years or so on his team. I mean, so he likes that uniqueness. And then he'll also, when he had I can't remember her name, the 5'8" kid. So I think Kelly will get creative and kind of fill in, find the right, get the best out of whatever kids he picks up, and is willing to he's not just a cookie cutter of I'm just going to do the same type of kid, same prototype all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think he's I think he is a very tactical coach, maybe more so than most. And it didn't surprise me. Texas has a great crowd. I've never felt that was a difficult place to play in. Val, you played in Gregory Gym many times, but it's a polite crowd. In some ways, it's similar to Nebraska. I mean, they have the swim team taking off their shirts, but that seems like something you'd see in the 1960s. It's not. It really doesn't intimidate a team. That didn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's always fun to play at home, and Texas, everybody has their home facilities that they, are comfortable playing in. And Texas is one that's been there for years. With the new floor and everything, I think it's fantastic that they finally got that new floor, because it was hard to see the lines on the wooden floor and all that. But they built a great program there, and they've just, the crowd is just as educated as a Nebraska crowd, which is fun because they know. And like you said, they're not as hostile. Now, if they play A&M there, they're probably going to be a lot more hostile than any other team. But they just love good volleyball, and it's kind of a fun, it's kind of like an old Coliseum type atmosphere when you play there, because they
Yeah.
have that they have like a second floor that kind of hangs over, and it's kind of like an old Coliseum type atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of our listeners are focused on the Nebraska A&M match, and they were shocked by it. And I did get a text from Danny last night. When I reached out to her and congratulated her on the season, and she indicated that Bergen was really sick and that would not have played if Campbell Flynn had not broken her hand the week before. And then I don't know, one of you mentioned, Val, maybe you mentioned that Allie Czech stepped on a ball in warmups. That's just hard to believe that could happen, because she hits a much quicker tempo, and I think particularly in the first two sets could have scored, because A&M was basically ignoring the right side and committing on Nebraska's middle, because it's a higher ball that was going to Virginia. And then they had another player out. I can't remember who the other player that was factored into it. But A&M just played really well, and I thought the critical thing was Nebraska's blocking. Nebraska blocked really well against Kansas. It's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw Kansas head coach gave a speech very similar to the one that Jamie gave to A&M, and that's, we're ready for this. We've prepared for this, and Kansas goes out and Nebraska blows them up, and yet A&M goes out and right away. I guess Nebraska jumped out to an early lead, like 10-3 or something. A&M scores 10 points in a row. That's almost impossible to do.
That girl, that serve was ridiculous. She was really ripping into that thing.
You're talking about the A&M middle blocker.
Yeah.
Those
were rockets, and they weren't sailing out. Like, it wasn't like Nebraska was passing a lot of balls that were on their way out. Those things were, they had to try to pass those balls.
Yeah. Well, it was impressive, but what's your insight into what happened there, Kirsten? Why do you think A&M was so successful?
Well, I think there was a variety of things. You alluded to the serve and pass game broke down, and I think A&M, blocked the middles, but also once Nebraska was out of system, they were able to control. And then when A&M's got transition balls, they had the pins, either on the right side or the left side, especially Stowers, not as much the other kid, but that in transition, they were putting the ball down. Rallies were not going back and forth sometimes they would, but in general, if they got an in-system ball, they were going to swing for a kill. I thought Nebraska made some really surprising errors in some crucial moments. And, I can think of a back row attack ball that I thought was just going to be crushed. I think it was in the fifth game, and it got sprayed wide, and there was a surprising number of instances that I thought, well, that's not normal Nebraska, that they're giving up some unforced errors in inopportune moments. Now, I will say that fourth game by both teams was extraordinary. I thought it was almost all kills. That was how, A&M didn't get a match point till what, 5 or 6 times that Nebraska had a set point. I don't know. I'm guessing, but it was quite a while.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really high quality play by both teams, that they were both taking great rips, but you could see who was stepping up for the different teams. Obviously Bergen wanted every ball to go to Alec when she was in the front row. And that was the thing that really stood out and forced her in situations that I don't think they've forced quite as much this year, that Alec was saying, I want the ball.
Yeah. She was pretty adamant about wanting the ball. That's for sure.
Yeah. And she's kind of tough. I'm sure Bergen's like, okay, you got it. The other thing that I think needs to get mentioned is, you're up 2-0 on Nebraska. You lose a match in the fourth set at, what was it, 35-33, whatever it was. You had Was it that much? You had
Yeah.
what, 3 or 4 match points, and you've got a team that's never been in this situation. This is not a veteran team. Yeah, it's a veteran team in age, but as far as going to a Final Four, and this is where I think Jamie Morrison is special. I think he can regroup a group, but he doesn't panic. And I actually said to my kids as I was watching, I said, the thing with A&M, a lot of teams would be done at this point, but they'll play. I don't know if they'll win the 5th set, but they will not roll over. He'll have them mentally back in, ready to go in this 5th.
Yeah, it was 37-35. I just looked it up.
37-35.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, those are great observations. Val, what do you think?
Well, I think that I think Andy kind of struggled in the beginning. I think they were trying to go pin to pin, Nebraska was. And I think that in a situation, I know that Andy was in the 5-1, but maybe run a C, a back one, or an A instead of just constantly going slide and it not, they weren't connecting for a while. And I think that really frustrated, she had a couple of swings that were nice swings, but they were out down the sideline. And I think they're that kind of frustrated Nebraska a little bit. And but then when the freshman came in, she was, like Alex, she was all over the place. And it was nothing, it just was the connection for that match for Andy and Bergen. It had nothing to do with either. I mean, it was both of them, but it wasn't one or the other. And when the freshman came in, it was just new blood, and she just decided to play like Becca Alec and show everywhere and kind of frustrate A&M a little bit. But when you're going pin to pin, I just feel that teams the middles need to show from zones 3 to zones 9 along the net. So, 3 being an inside set on the outside, and then 9 all the way to the pin. Just kind of show up anywhere in between there, but not the same zone 3 or 4 or 5 times in a row.
A tip of the hat to Danny Busboom Kelly there. There are a lot of coaches. I mean, I don't know of any player that's probably more beloved than Andy Jackson on Nebraska volleyball.
Mm-hmm.
And she's also, in some ways, because of how she runs the slide, the most spectacular player. She's a Player of the Year finalist. There are a lot of coaches that wouldn't have the guts, the courage to sub in a freshman in that situation. And the kid came in, and I've said before that Mania reminds me of Elena Oden, which is the highest compliment I can give to anybody, because
Mm-hmm.
she's so balanced. She's such a great blocker, and she's going to be a tremendous player. I thought that if Nebraska was an Olympic team that you were preparing for 6 months down the road, that the ideal lineup would be Mania in the middle and move Andy Jackson over to the right side, because Jackson has shown she can hit off 2 feet. She could side out on the slide, but that's
Terry,
yeah.
one thing that I really admired watching Danny and crew coach this year, because they did use their bench so much. And I think we all thought that could pay dividends if they did hit crunch time. And we've alluded to this, like all these things that they prepared for fell apart, with the right side, the setting. I mean, it worked in the middle. They could have flipped the liberos, but I mean, Choboy worked in and played a great match. So all these things that I felt was unique, not something I ever did as a coach, to really build that bench so that, and I can tell you as a coach, and I'm sure you guys can, when you're starting to get control of a match and a player comes in on the other side and brings a spark, it's hard to compete against, right? Because you've gotten used to where they are. And I felt like they had set themselves up to be able to weather a lot of different punches, and those things just got taken away at the last minute, which is really sad.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting that I thought that was one of the main things that stood Nebraska apart from everybody else was their depth, and the fact that they could withstand if a starter was to go down. They were deep at every position. You got a couple of right-siders. You got a good, a great setter, Player of the Year, and, from the year before in high school, backing her up, and 4 middles. And, I mean, it was just, to me, it was like, the injury, they can sustain it. A lot of teams can't. And it's interesting that happened the way it did for them. It's just, it reminds you how hard it is to win a national championship, because things have got to fall into place, and there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, that a lot of people are unaware of. 95, we were in the national semifinals, and we went, this was in Amherst, Massachusetts, and we went and everybody stayed in Springfield. So we took our bus out. We were the last team to do the early morning serve and pass. And so everybody else had gone out there and then come back to Springfield. Well, we went out there, but there was an impending blizzard coming. And so I told the players, I said, bring your unis, just in case we get trapped or whatever. And so we go to serve and pass, and one of our outside hitters goes down, tears her ACL, landed awkwardly, just jumping up and catching a set. We weren't even hitting. We were just passing and then go and, approach and catch the set. And she landed awkwardly. So we lose an outside hitter the day of the semifinals to an ACL tear. And we got snowed in, and we had to go find someplace to hang out for the rest of the day before we played the match that night in the semis. And nobody knew, what that had happened, but we were kind of a mess. That team was a mess. And, that's just, it happens, and it just can happen at the strangest of times. And so it was amazing for them to have all that stuff go on. Setter gets sick, backup breaks a finger, the opposite that they surely could have used, that goes down. So it happens, and it's no matter how good everybody thinks you are, there's so much luck involved that, along with all the preparation and all the building that team. We practiced with back in the days when teams did have depth. We felt we could plug in anybody, and that's how we practiced. We rotated in scrimmages. We rotated by position from one side of the net to the other, so that we ended up with all kinds of different matchups and different combinations. And we felt like we could do that too. And then when that one player goes down, and it kind of just throws a monkey wrench into the works, and it can affect the team in a big way.
As we look to this coming weekend, give me your thoughts on Pitt and Texas A&M. How do you see that playing out? Kirsten, what do you think?
This is always so hard for me to make predictions. It's Pitt is a solid volleyball team with a generational player, and so can Babcock carry that much load? I don't know. I would not be surprised to see A&M pull this upset too. I think, first of all, I think they're going to go in expecting to win, as will Pitt, but everyone will expect Pitt to win. I don't think A&M is going to be intimidated. The question is, I think, to me, A&M has two alphas, and Pitt may only have one. So, can Babcock cover that ground in between? And then, does the A&M, does anyone go on long serving runs? That's the part that gets lost, of who wins the serve and pass game usually wins the match.
Well, Mosher has a great serve, the setter for Pitt, and she's capable of. I thought that was one area that Nebraska was vulnerable in, that they didn't have. When you look at these teams, all of them have somebody that has 45, 50 service aces. And I didn't think that Nebraska had some people. Their best server may have been the setter. Bergen might have been the best server, but they didn't have somebody that was going back consistently and making service runs off strength of serve. But I think the teams left in the tournament do that. Val, Don, either of you have any strong feelings on that matchup?
Well, I think that Babcock had 4 digs, and their setter had 7 digs. But I think if Babcock's seeing more balls defensively, it's going to change a whole bunch. And they play so shallow that, if Pitt can just, or if A&M can just move the ball around deep, short, whatever on defense, it's really going to frustrate Pitt. Now, on the flip side, again, Mosher's had a great night the other night, and their outsides, along with Babcock, can, kind of help Babcock out too. So, it's just going to be a really good battle. I wouldn't be surprised if it went 5. I wouldn't be surprised at either team winning. It's just going to be, I think it'll be really fun to watch. That's going to be another Nebraska type A&M game, I think.
But Bayless is much better than she was last year. She's become a really
was
nice
doing great too.
attacker, and Bree Kelly is a can score in the middle. The other, how about the other match? Kentucky.
I'm going to pick Kentucky
Hudson's
in
on
this
a mission.
one.
Yeah, Hudson's on a mission, man. She is jumping higher and hitting the ball harder than she did last year, and I don't even know if that's possible.
DeLay was a player of the year candidate going in. So,
right.
you've got that 1-2 punch over there. I think can Thinkbed show up and carry a decent amount of load on the right side, because then all of a sudden you have 3 formidable attackers. But again, all these teams are great. Any of these teams can win. But I think Wisconsin has one incredible outside and one really good outside, while I think Kentucky's got 2 really incredible outside. So that's what would give me the edge there.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin, they when they're going good, it's because all those supporting cast players are playing above what they normally do. I think, and that's the way a lot of teams can be. You're getting great performances from those kids at the right time of year, and so you just don't know, because that's a harder team sometimes to scout than the team where you have the known quantity players over there. So I think that's going to be a huge factor. I also and Collier's she's got to play big, but that's the way it has to be. Your big gun has to play big, and that's the same thing. I was thinking about Babcock versus Nebraska, the potential of that, all along, and I was just thinking, is she going to be able to put up the kind of numbers against Nebraska that she's been putting up against everybody else? That's going to be a huge thing. So now she doesn't have to worry about it doing it against Nebraska, but A&M playing very well. Kentucky, you're talking about Hudson playing out of her mind, and so motivated and so fired up about this whole thing. Players that are that competitive can sometimes go wacky, in situations like that. They're so competitive and they want it so bad that it can backfire sometimes. And sometimes they get other players on the team are like taken aback, like, whoa, slow down, or there's an issue there. And I just thought I'd throw that out there because, yeah, she's playing at a really high level, unbelievable, but she's being competitive that something could just set her off, and it might go bad. I'm just saying anything's possible.
Well, the other thing is DeLay actually had the better match in the against Creighton, and I've always been a Brooklyn DeLay fan, but I think Eva Hudson has impacted her mindset. Those two, when they go into the huddle, look like lionesses growling at each other. It is.
Well, at this point in time, at this point in the season, they're used to it. Her teammates are used to it being her the way she is. You could see that with Louisville and Chicoine, same thing. Chicoine and Hudson. I can't imagine, having both of those two on your team, like Don, like Dave had, at Purdue. You got 2 players that are that competitive, and that fired up. That's what makes Shondell's season so remarkable is that you lose two players, not just of the caliber that they are, but the type of competitors that suddenly just disappear from your team. And that's a huge hole to fill. I got to give him a lot of credit. That was an unbelievable year for considering the position he was put in.
Yeah,
I
he
think
certainly did.
I think the Wisconsin-Kentucky match comes down to the right sides. I think Egan has been playing really well, and it's going to be between Egan and Thinpen if one of those two decides to really step it up, then that's going to help their team get the W.
I can't see Wisconsin winning that match if Carter Booth doesn't get over 3.5, 4 kills per set. And up to this point in her career, she hasn't been that type of player. But she's shown a little bit more in this tournament. But I would think they have to get that from her. Kirsten, you've spoken out about the first round matches being on ESPN Plus, and those of us that have used to watch that bouncing ball on the internet, where you didn't have any picture of the match. The ball would just bounce over the net. You'd finally see, well, Stanford won the point. We're so happy to have it on ESPN Plus, but we've gotten to the point now where these matches certainly should be televised. Any insight into how, when you go to the ESPN site and you look up volleyball, it's there before rifle and mud wrestling, and it's
I have gotten a little more context. Of course, I start getting calls when I shoot my mouth off like that. So a couple things, and I didn't realize this because I watched everything over the first weekend on ESPN Plus, but the what do they call it? The fifth set, the wraparound show was on linear for the first weekend, and I didn't realize that. So that was good. So that was on I think ESPN2.
One of those.
And I think where the challenges we have are the time of year, and the TV contracts are a ways out. So getting us on linear for those extended periods of time that we'd need for those opening rounds are going to be a challenge, is what I got told, because the contracts are in place for football, men's basketball, things along those lines. Now, of course, I pushed back and said, well, then we don't need all of them on. Let's get some of them on. So, I think we have to continue to push and push and push. I do think, I've been told this numerous times, ESPN is all in for volleyball. Like, they understand the momentum volleyball has, which is fantastic. I think they heard the complaints on the app being a little bit clunky. So how do you make it more user-friendly? So I think those are some of the things that the focal point will be on. So again,
we lost
ESPN just time, Kristen.
ESPN just zapped Kirsten. Sent a laser. Well, as we close here, I'm going to ask each of you, for your gut feeling on who's the last team standing. Val, Novak, who ends up holding the trophy and why?
Oof. I hate to say it, I wouldn't mind seeing A&M do it just because they've played so well. But I really can't pick anyone from this four because Kentucky is fantastic. They all have such fantastic players and coaches and staff, and it's just going to be a very fun Final Four. Very fun with a lot of close matches. So I'm always an underdogger, so A&M is. And if you beat Nebraska, right, you better win the national championship.
Kirsten?
Similarly, I think any of these four teams can win it. There's not one team that I would be totally surprised if they were holding it at the end. I'm going to pick Kentucky based on the fact that they have the two strongest pins on the outside, but but kudos to all these. Maybe it's Dan Fisher because he's the one with hair, and it's the battle of the bald this year.
You stole that one
But
from me. I was going to use that
oh,
one.
dang it! No, I'm sorry. So kudos to all these coaches. That it is hard. It's a grind. It starts in January, and they all have done a phenomenal job.
Coach Shaw.
Well, I think that this has so many possibilities. You got A&M, who has never been there before, so that's going to be a factor. However, Jamie's got that team believing in themselves, and they think that they're the grittiest team out there. And however, they're going to have a letdown after a match like they just had against Nebraska under those circumstances. So it's going to be interesting to see how they come out. Then Fish, who's he's not still knocking on that door, and they've got the player that could carry them through the whole thing. If her arm doesn't drop off, she's going to get a lot of swings this coming weekend. Kentucky, I think I kind of agree with Kirsten that there's a slight edge there because those two pin hitters, and they can use, they got 6 rotations of, they just keep coming at you, along with some pretty good supporting cast players, and the setter is outstanding. All the setters, I think, again, when I saw the kind of the good match, bad match, good match type thing, if one of these setters falters a little bit, then they're gonna struggle. But I wouldn't count any of these teams out. Even Wisconsin, who when you look on paper and you see, they got this one great player and then a middle who probably needs to do more than she's done up to this point, but she's capable of doing it. All the coaches are good. I saw some great adjustments and some tactical stuff that I haven't seen a whole lot of in recent years, and that's just like Fisher moved his setter over to the left side to block in a couple of situations, and I love that stuff because I used to do that stuff all the time. I used to try to throw Carrie Walsh around one side or the other and make you think about, you look over there and figure out where is she this time. And so I know Fisher does that one rotation where he brings in another setter and puts a front row player in for his set for the setter in the front row, just for one rotation. It's like the middle goes back to serve and you bring in a setter, and then you pull the setter out of the right front and bring in a blocker, and and they'll do that and just for one rotation. And it's interesting to see coaches do stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any tactical adjustments that teams will make, especially when you've got teams that are so reliant on one big hitter. So it'll be. I'm looking forward to it. I have no idea, who's going to pull this thing out. It's whoever, and whoever avoids disaster between now and their matches. I mean, heck, somebody's going to trip at the airport or
don't step on a ball, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knows? And so it's going to be fun because it's going to be a team that puts 2 really good matches together, and and may just be the margin may just be just a little bit better than the others. So it's going to be fun.
Well, and those are great observations. As we're talking here, I was thinking back, and Val, you might have insight into this. Why was Tori Stafford? I've never seen Tori Stafford have a match where she wasn't a dominant player, but she hit like 120 in the match. And I've considered her as good a left side as there is in the game, as good a 6th rotation player. What happened there?
I think what happened was they started serving her, but sometimes you have players who the more times they touch the ball, the better they get. And I know a lot of teams during the season have been serving Tori Stafford. And I'm like, she's the kid that you keep serving her, it's going to just keep getting worse for you. So I think they went away from serving her for a while, and that kind of messed with her rhythm a little bit. And 2, they just weren't setting her. I mean, Wisconsin just had their number. Sometimes you have to set, when I was watching Purdue, they would set Anderson inside against Babcock so she could swing and have the ball go out of bounds. So they would actually set her in like the 2 or 3 zone. So when she was hitting that block, the block would go out of, the ball would go out of bounds. Whereas for, Stafford, they just set her the same ball every single time with no, moving her around a little bit. So I think she probably got a little frustrated too.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful. And before I sign off here, I do want to thank Danny Busboom Kelly for the job that she's done at Nebraska. And she's she's got great emotional intelligence, and I appreciate what she has brought to Nebraska volleyball. And I want to thank the three of you. And I appreciate what you not just bring to this podcast, but what you continue to do, for the volleyball community. I want to thank Brad Black and Human X Ventures, because without them, we couldn't do this. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody else next time. It should be a wonderful Final Four, and we'll all look forward to cheering on whoever wins.
Inside the Coaching Mind is presented by Human X Ventures and is pleased to be a part of the Learfield Varsity Podcast Network. If you're on Facebook, look for the Inside the Coaching Mind group and join a vibrant discussion of volleyball and leadership. TerryPettit.com is where you'll find Terry's books, writings, and downloads, as well as subscription links for all your podcast apps.